And ladies and gentlemen, this is TVP World. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee. You're watching another edition of Press Corner, where we invite journalists, columnists, and other esteemed guests to talk about the most important topic of the week. Now, in the celebration of free press, we're going to have a lot of diverse voices and opinions, and you be the judge. Now, we are going to be talking about a various of topics ranging from Ukraine to the recent Polish Armed Forces Day. And without further ado, let's introduce our viewers to the guests we have in the studio. Starting on my right, Mr. Bogusław Chrabota, editor-in-chief.
It's the right pronunciation, yeah.
Great. Hopefully I didn't botch that up too bad.
It's a bit difficult for some people, but
very much so. But
seems
the editor-in-chief of Rzeczpospolita.
Newspaper.
All right, I'm still working on that. Thank you so much for being with us on TVP World. And on my left here, we have Aleksandra Karasińska, journalist and publicist, as well as Mr. Łukasz Warzecha, political analyst. Thank you guys so much for being with us on TVP World.
Thank you.
Good to have you all. Now, we are going to start by looking at the situation in Ukraine with the recent incursion into the Kursk region. A lot of morale has been boosted since the incursion began, but what's the real situation on the ground and how have things started to develop? Before we dive into the topic, let's take a look at our report.
Russia has reportedly diverted thousands of troops from the occupied Ukrainian territory in order to stave off the advance of Kyiv's offensive. Ukrainian forces, meanwhile, are attempting to block the movement of Russian reinforcements. According to Kyiv, Ukrainian troops were able to move 35 kilometers deep into Russian territory since the beginning of the incursion last Thursday.
In the course of this 1 week, Ukraine has already taken more or less the same area that the Russians have managed to take during the whole last year. So this is already a big thing.
The Ukrainian operation in Kursk has forced Russia to redeploy forces away from the Donbass. While Kyiv states the purpose of the operation is to establish a buffer zone meant to protect Ukraine's border regions from Russian strikes, analysts say that overstretching Russian forces may have been its main goal.
We see that the occupier is suffering losses, and this is beneficial, very beneficial for our defense. This includes the destruction of the Russian army's logistics and the depletion of their reserves. We must inflict maximum damage on all Russian positions, and we are doing so.
As the Ukrainian forces are moving towards the Kurchatov nuclear power plant near Kursk, Moscow accuses Kyiv of planning a provocation at the facility in order to blame it on Russia. Kyiv denies the allegations and says it has no ability to stage such an attack.
Ukraine has shown that it can counterattack, that it can be audacious and it can take the enemy by surprise. More importantly, I think it is a blow aimed at the Kremlin and Putin.
Ukrainian troops have also begun distributing aid to Russian civilians living in captured areas. With the establishment of occupational authorities, Ukrainian forces are preparing for a long stay in Russian territory.
All right, so as we see, I think in the very beginning of this incursion, it's very, very good morale for the Ukrainians. But now analysts are saying that maybe the timing of it is a little bit crucial too. We're potentially looking at a lot of complication here when it comes to really figuring out the situation with the fog of war still going on. Mr. Bogusław, can you help me understand whether this is, the stated goal to kind of stretch the Russian forces thinner, or they're forcing the Russians to play defense, they're trying to gain some ground as a bargaining chip going forward? What's your take on this?
I'll tell you, this is war. Means a lot of questions and secrets. And so, first of all, it was done very quickly and in a secret.
Yeah.
So that was the main reason why it was so successful for Ukrainians. We watch, we analyze, but we are far away probably from the strategic targets they have in mind. I mean, in generals in Ukraine, because we don't know if it's a bridgehead, or they want to occupy, or there's a symbolic activity, or maybe something else, but maybe nuclear power plant in Kursk, maybe propaganda. Definitely that's a new phase of the war. Because Ukrainians presented to the world that they are not only fighting in defense, but they are also able to fight, in attack. And one more thing, very important from the point of view, and probably the world doesn't understand it pretty well. it's a very famous name, Kursk, and it's very much symbolic for Russians and for Ukrainians, I mean for East Europeans and for Germans as well, because it was a battle of Kursk in the Second World War, where was a clash of two big tank arms, and Germans lost in this battle. So for all Ukrainians and for all Russians, operation next to Kursk in this region means something important. So you have finally some secrets about the strategy. They have you have and the viewers all over the world they see the big success of the Ukrainian army, and there's another symbolic sense behind.
Right. And when we're looking at the piece from The Guardian, it says that Ukraine's extraordinary incursion into Kursk has changed the narrative of the war, but it is a high-risk strategy. So my question for you guys especially is that whether or not this is going to kind of thin out the Ukrainian forces, because we do see a lot of the more elite forces with the most modern Western weapon pushing into the Kursk region. Will that make it so that the places that Ukraine needs to defend is kind of a little bit lacking?
Well, it was a gambling. Definitely, but Ukrainian probably had no other chance, no other option, because we've saw for the last 12 months or even longer that this Russian grinding machine was pushing forward on very long piece of land, very long front. So given the fact that Russian forces have mobilized more people, and Ukrainians really were spread thin, and we still have this reluctance from the West to support more heavily Ukrainian army. They had to do something, and that was, from my point of view, very brave and very daring, I would say, attack. But their goal, I would say, there were a few of them. First of all, to pull Russian forces from Donetsk region, where they were losing ground. Mm-hmm. And they obviously said we have to help our colleagues in the Donetsk-Lugansk region. And secondly, they have to, they show the world and their allies in the West that they could win this war, they could get ground if they get more help, more support. Also, it's very important internally in the Ukraine. I have many friends in Ukraine. I have worked in Kiev for many months before, and I know that the morale of the society was very low. People are very tired. The society is really, there is a very heavy cost on the whole society, not only people on the front line. So this shows that the leadership can really win some ground, that they can do some spectacular win, and this really shifts the perception of the war inside and outside. So, and lastly, I would say there is only during the campaign, Ukrainians have captives, mm-hmm. many Russian soldiers, and they will be able to exchange, to make an exchange for the soldiers that are still kept in Russian prisons or Russian camps. So it is a gamble, definitely, but very daring, and I say it might be very huge success.
Right. Okay, I want to explore the timing of all of this. Like when this happened, of course, this Guardian piece also mentioned that there's a possibility that Ukraine needs to take something right now to have a bargaining chip to be on the negotiation table, be it the peace summit that's coming up or in preparation for who knows who's going to be in charge in the United States going forward and whether or not they'll be forced into a negotiation table. Do you think that is a solid line of argument of the timing for this incursion?
Yes, I do, but let me first say that I'm no military analyst, so I'm not going to analyze this situation from a military point of view, but I also think that it really does not have to be analyzed in that way, because this is first and foremost a political take and a maneuver of political significance, not really military significance. Why? First of all, one possible interpretation is the one that you have just mentioned, that because some kind of negotiations eventually approach us, and this is even Mr. Zelensky who has started to talk about it, about inviting Russians for the next round of peace talks, Ukraine really has to have something to be able to bargain with Russia. But there is also another possible interpretation, that this is a maneuver which serves to really prolong the war. So, first of all, we have to ask ourselves who will profit. And I would say that because this is, in my opinion, this is a typical proxy war. One of the forces that will profit is definitely the US, which, in my opinion, doesn't want this war to end. The US wants Russia to bleed as much as possible, so they want to keep this war going on. Another interpretation is that Mr. Zelensky does need something to show to his people, because Ukrainians are getting more and more reluctant towards the ongoing war. They see it more and more as a kind of meat-grinding machine, and which doesn't lead to any effect. So this is something that he has to show to his own people. So there are really lots of various interpretations. And what is most important, in my opinion, are these interpretations which are relevant to eventual peace talks. So either this is really a, let's say, bargaining piece for peace talks, or is it a way to prolong the war and to put peace talks in some further distance? We don't know when. These two interpretations are possible, in my opinion. We don't know which one is more probable.
Right. I wouldn't agree that United States' objective is to prolong the war, but I would add something more that is really striking for me, that we have to remember, you mentioned historical context, that this is the first time since the Second World War, almost 100 years, that the foreign power entered Russian territory, and successfully. So this is a huge blow to the leadership of Vladimir Putin. He claims, and Russia perceives themselves as an empire. An empire does not lose ground. So what it means that Putin has been humiliated very heavily. And I'm afraid that the retaliation will be very heavy, because from previous moments in history, we know how Putin reacts to humiliation. He reacts with very strong violence.
So this is risky.
This is risky game. This is risky. This is risky moment during this campaign. But in my opinion, and many experts, Ukrainians just basically had no other chance to react. Otherwise, they would keep losing ground.
Yeah.
What's your take?
If I can add some more points, I think that first, the key expression for everything we speak about right here is this mobilization. Yeah. So it mobilizes, West, America, us, Poles, partners and allies. It mobilizes Ukrainian society, it mobilizes army, etc., etc. So from this point of view, it was very important just to find a factor that mobilizes. The first. Second, there's a danger behind, very important danger, because as you remember, maybe Putin announced some time ago that just after entering foreign forces the border of the former USSR and now Russian Federation, he will think about using nuclear weapons, and that's the basic. That's a basic point for this for the threats we have. Now he can use officially and legally, from the Russian point of view, nuclear weapons, strategic or tactical, that doesn't matter. But now he is in power to use it from the point of view of Moscow. And of course, if you ask me if I believe that he will use, I don't believe, because it's too much. I think that it would be really a final act of this war.
Right, and he'll lose the bargaining chip.
But there is a little percent risk about this nuclear weapons.
So, just one thing, if I may add to what you have just said about mobilizing, especially mobilizing Poland or Poles. I have a very interesting poll in front of me, a very fresh poll, which says that 54.5 Poles wants Ukraine to start talking with Russia. So in fact, this is a very clear majority of Poles who want this war to end.
Everybody wants for them to start talks. Negotiations are always behind scenes.
You can't talk with Putin.
So
it's useless.
absolutely obvious for everybody all over the world that this war should be coming to the end. This is natural, and we are waiting. But that's not the matter of talks, but conditions. In which conditions you talk? As a victim or as a victor?
I would ask. It's not important what Poles or I don't know, in Belgium or in Holland people think, but what is important, what Ukrainians and Russians think, because they are fighting together, and one is obviously protecting their country, but we know that Putin understands only one way of talking, and it's power. And the Western allies, including Polish government, including United States and NATO allies, understand the mistake made before, that we were, the West in general, the liberal or democratic countries were able to talk, to negotiate, to come to terms with Russia under the Putin. It turns out it was not a good strategy. The only words he understands is blunt power.
Let me disagree. It's not important almost at all what Russians think, because Russia is not a democratic state. It's an authoritarian state. And I have heard so many times that there will be a social unrest in Russia, and Russia will crumble down, and people will just flood Kremlin and murder Putin. Nothing like this has happened. So the influence of public opinion in Russia is very, very, very limited. And it's also to some extent a fact for Ukraine, because I would like to remind you that in fact President Zelensky is a, let's say, provisional president. Presidential elections should have happened in Ukraine a long time ago. Of course, there is a war, so there is no election. And in this way, we can also see the whole situation also of the Kursk region as Mr. Zelensky fighting for his political future. So Ukraine is not really a fully democratic country right now. So of
it's
course,
a country, the war.
Yeah, so okay, but it's not.
Forget about democracy.
So public opinion counts to some extent in Ukraine, but not as much as in Poland or in Germany or in Belgium.
One more thing about public opinion in Russia, because this is for sure not democracy, okay? But they have public opinion founded of mythology. And this is mythology of the great victory in Second World War, about the power of a nation, about the,
empire.
Scope, empire, yes. This is a typically imperial mythology. And until they feel victorious in this war, they are in strength. Now the word and the war shows that they are not victorious, that they are just losing. And it may attract public opinion in Russia very, very much. And that's the real problem Putin faces now. And it's impossible to ignore this factor.
Just one more thing. We will have a very interesting text in the next issue on Monday of our weekly Do Rzeczy, written by Maciej Pieczyński, our specialist on Russia and Ukraine. And he notices one thing, that the incursion, Ukrainian incursion into Kursk region helps Putin, in fact, in selling his propaganda to his people that we are attacked from outside. So it paradoxically might help him unite Russians around Kremlin.
Or distract the local mythology. And I believe that that's a real threat for Putin. Not to be a victorious leader. And from the point of view of possible change in elite, in political elite in Russia, because of course no more revolutions in Russia. It will not be a social revolution that will distract, the powers. But I think that they are able to change, leaders in this nation in a very secret way, and that's a real danger for Putin.
Right. But either way, it does seem that this incursion into Russia really ruffled a lot of feathers. So of course,
the game, really completely
very big change.
New phase of the war and new face of Ukrainian army.
And of course, we'll have to keep our eyes peeled as the situation further develops. But without further ado, let's actually move on to let's move on to our next topic going forward, because we also have new development when it comes to evidence that's coming into light about the 2022 sabotage of the Nord Stream pipeline. Now, there's 6 group of Ukrainians are reportedly responsible for the act, and Germany has issued an arrest warrant for one of the alleged perpetrators who previously resided in Poland. Poland. Before we go into that discussion, let's take a look at a report.
The Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines were ruptured by a series of explosions in September 2022, affecting 3 out of 4 pipelines linking Germany and Russia under the Baltic Sea. The explosions caused gas leaks, further exacerbating the energy crisis in Europe. A Wall Street Journal investigation published this week alleges that the attack was carried out by a group of Ukrainian divers. Several German media outlets reported that a Ukrainian man named by the authorities as Volodymyr Z, last known to have lived in Poland, was among the divers who planted explosive devices in the pipelines.
At this stage, however, the official Kyiv has to be very cautious because it doesn't want to upset its allies, including Germans, Danes, and not to mention the US. The truth will come out eventually, but it could be a provocation staged by the Russians.
On Wednesday, Germany handed Poland an arrest warrant for a Ukrainian diver who is alleged to have been part of a group that planted the explosives on the pipes. The man was last known to have resided in Poland, but according to Polish authorities, he has already left the country.
We find it strange that the person has been searched for by the German side, but the planned arrest had not been announced and registered within the Schengen system. That's why this person was simply able to leave the country. That's also something we find strange.
The former head of German foreign intelligence, August Hanning, and deputy editor-in-chief of German magazine Die Zeit, Holger Stark, alleged that the Nord Stream sabotage must have been carried out with approval from the highest levels in Ukraine and Poland.
In Poland, the Nord Stream assassins are considered heroes. This means that for any Polish government, the arrest and extradition of a Ukrainian who is suspected of having blown up these pipes would always be a political issue.
In response, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk took to the social media platform X to comment, in very harsh words, on the rhetoric coming from Poland's western neighbor. The Nord Stream projects have been widely criticized across Eastern and Western Europe for their potential geopolitical risks, with many viewing them as strategic tools for Russia.
All right, so let's start from this side first. Łukasz, can you tell us what's the significance of this new revelation? Is it going to throw a wrench into a lot of these kind of international relations? Does this have very broad implications that might change the course of how we look at things going forward?
Actually, it's not so new. I mean, first articles in this area appeared in the Wall Street Journal a couple of months ago, and even earlier, because it was, as far as I remember, in the first half of last year, 2023, there were very similar reports in New York Times and in Die Zeit. Very similar, I compared, and for example, the question of the crew of the yacht, 6 people, including 1 woman, exactly the same things were said then, so more than a year ago. So it's not really very new. What is new is, to some extent, the Polish part of the story. In my opinion, there is no way we can find out in any foreseeable future what really happened, because this is a game of intelligence, so it's very difficult to say. So we can only speculate. And if we have several variants of events, I would say that, in my opinion, the least probable one is that of Russian sabotage. It makes no sense, because Nord Stream was their project, done together with the Germans. It was a very useful tool of economic blackmail towards Europe.
It would be like shooting your own hostage, right?
There was absolutely no point.
It's possible from time to time shooting.
In my
hostages.
opinion, it's really makes no sense, and it was a several billion euros investment. So it was destroyed.
Probably cheaper ways to provoke.
I think so. So we have left with basically 2 variants. One, which was published in a very long blog article by investigative journalist Seymour Hersh. It was in February 2023. And Seymour Hersh told us a story about the US working together with the Norwegians, blowing up the pipeline. And then we have, and it was almost an immediate reaction in the US media, as I said, it was New York Times that wrote about it. We have the story about Ukrainians blowing the pipeline, even with Americans opposing, because this is also a very interesting part of the story right now, that Americans actually tried to oppose the action, and Mr. Zelensky tried to stop it, but he wasn't able to do it. So my interpretation would be that, from my point of view, the most probable version is Mr. Seymour Hersh's version. And what we saw in the New York Times, what we saw in the Wall Street Journal, are rather stories which were leaked by, in my opinion, US intelligence. So in the way, so they cover the actual very risky story of Americans being involved directly in blowing up the pipeline. But as I said, these are only...
Of course, a lot of these are all speculations, but Mr. Bogusław, you mentioned earlier that there are instances where they do shoot the hostage. So that brings me to the question.
Especially in Russia, that you know, nightmares with people, with forces, etc. We know it. But I'd like to point out something else. You know, we are just two realities confronting each other here. Yeah. From one side, you have democracy, I mean, persecution of German persecutors. You have a typical criminal case that should be sent to the court and finally judged. Yeah, that's the logics of this system. This is natural for democracy. And German persecutors have no other way but to continue this persecution, asking for let's say, witnesses, etc., or for extradition. From the other hand, you have reality of the war in Ukraine. And there is a reality of war, and probably if, that's also a speculation, if they were engaged in a bombing pipeline, undermining pipeline, it was the part of the war. And the people who were in this case, for example, I mean, this Ukrainian person who is just persecuted by Germans. Yeah, these people are regular fighters in a war. So I don't believe in any form of extradition of these potentially responsible people to Germany just to finish or to continue the case in a prosecutor's office in Berlin.
Right. I have a difficult one for you. So Łukasz mentioned earlier that eventually we might never be able to find out, we can't find out what the real kind of story behind it is. Is it that we can't find out, or do we not want to find out?
Oh, that's an interesting one. I would say, I don't know if you remember, but when the event happened, when the Nord Stream was blown up, there were many comments. Most of the traces were, most of the people, analysts, shown Russia. But I remember a tweet on X by Radek Sikorski, who congratulated Ukrainians for the amazing action. And everybody says, what is he talking about? He's probably cut up from...
sorry, but in my opinion, he thanked Americans.
Yeah, he's the...
Americans, sorry. Okay, so basically, nobody knew what is going on that time. Mm-hmm. But right now, this investigation you mentioned, German investigation, shows some involvement of Polish government. Maybe not huge, but I think Polish authorities knew about what is going on. It would be difficult not to know. As you mentioned, there were information in the media about probable involvement of some Ukrainian forces, agents operating on from Polish territory. So I think during this phase of war, it would be very highly unusual if Polish authorities would have no idea what was going on. So right now, with the message from Prime Minister Donald Tusk, I think we could say that there is a shift in Polish stance on the Nord Stream, especially from Donald Tusk. And the right side of the political scene is commenting on finally he saw the light. But yes, his message is very blunt, and this is a message to German government. You should really not speak about this case, because the right is on the Ukrainian side.
But they cannot stop investigation. This is
of course,
a legal investigation.
But there are two things. There's politics.
Germany,
you have politics.
Legal investigation in Germany. They have to finish.
You have politics, and you have just a legal system that comes to the private property that was destroyed that time 2 years ago.
But
and as we know from the movies with James Bond, 007, some actions are undercover and will be undercover until a writer will reveal.
But one more remark concerning what you have just said. You say that Polish authorities probably had to know about it. I'm not that sure, because if we really dive into the story in Wall Street Journal, we find out that there was one diver who is supposed to be involved in the action living around Warsaw, but he just joined the team and they went in a van through Poland to Germany, to Rostock. And there was also a Ukrainian cover enterprise which rented the yacht in Rostock. Well, perhaps Polish authorities knew about that company, cover company of SBU, of Ukrainian intelligence. We don't know. And then there was just one call in Kołobrzeg of the yacht on its course to blow up it was accidental. And they were released. They were thought to be a little bit suspect by people from the authorities of the port. Border guard was called. They checked their documents. They were EU passports, and they were just let go. So I think for me, a more bothering variant of the events is that Polish authorities, in fact, did not know about what was going on. And what Donald Tusk wrote is just trying to, make a good face about it, whereas, in fact, we were played by Ukrainians. If the Ukrainian variant, of course, is true. We don't know that.
Yeah.
Either way is pretty disturbing.
Yeah, I would say one more thing to that, that recently when Donald Tusk made this announcement, this tweet, there was also a response from Chief of National Bureau of Security. And what he says that Polish politics parties are united. So we have very strong bipartisan voice that we support Ukraine, we are united, and this is something I think that is very important. And this is a message to Russia.
Yeah, and don't forget, it was another government at that time.
Yes.
Donald Tusk is a new prime minister. And it's possible also that it was a very, very true secret, very kept just close to body and revealed also for 2 or 3 people of Polish intelligence, probably prime minister. Maybe we should ask Mr. Morawiecki, who was the prime minister at that time. And if they were operating in Poland, yes, probably he should know, but he will not reveal, as far as I know.
Yeah, so I guess this will remain a mystery for the time being. And, well, without further ado, we have to move on to our next topic, because Poland has also celebrated National Armed Forces Day. And, of course, we talk a lot about security issues. And on this occasion, I hope we have the opportunity to look at some of these developments in the Polish security sphere in the last few years. So let's take a look at a report.
Celebrations began in Warsaw with a holy mass for the homeland, followed by a ceremonial changing of the guard at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, and a military parade featuring over 2,000 soldiers and 200 military units. Commemorative events were also held at locations historically tied to the Battle of Warsaw and in all major cities.
104 years ago, the resurgent Polish state managed to defend itself against the Bolshevik invasion. It was a glorious victory. We're building not just one of the biggest European armies, but also one of the world's most modern defense structures.
Poland is a leader in NATO in terms of defense spending, allocating as much as 4% of its GDP for this purpose. The largest military contracts signed by Poland in recent years include the delivery of F-35s, Patriot batteries, Abrams tanks, and Apache helicopters from the US. South Korea has also been contracted to provide Fa-50 fighters, K-2 Black Panther tanks, and K-9 Thunder howitzers.
Peace doesn't have a price. The sky is the limit. If you would like to have democracy, freedom of your, let's say, actions, you need to have a very strong and powerful army, or armed forces, because army is only the ground power. And if you have it, you can feel the real democracy and the real freedom. And it costs.
The contracts signed this week covered the delivery of 48 Patriot launchers, 96 Apache helicopters, and armored scout cars from a domestic arms company.
Dzisiaj kolejna umowa w Wielkim Tygodniu.
This is another deal in this great week for the Polish army. We started the week with a deal for 48 Patriot launchers. Yesterday marked a culmination point in the contracts we've been signing over the years. That is 96 Apache helicopters for the army.
To jest 96 Apache.
The size of the Polish armed forces has more than doubled over the last decade. It stood at 99,000 personnel in 2014 and now stands at 216,000. According to NATO estimates, it is now the third biggest army in the alliance, behind only the US and Turkey. Poland's ongoing military modernization rush comes at a heavy cost for the state budget. As Warsaw has recently been placed under the European Commission's excessive deficit procedure, it is expected that cuts in various areas will be needed. The Polish government is, however, adamant that the cuts will not affect military spending.
So when we discuss military in Poland, a lot of the discussion is always surrounding around like GDP spend, and of course Poland very much leading the rest of the NATO allies.
4%.
But I would like to point out this other statistic that is less quoted, but I think also significant, is that the percentage of that GDP actually going into equipment, Poland is also leading the pack by a lot, because some of the countries hitting that 2% of the GDP, they actually spend most of it on paying the personnel salary and call it 2%. But Poland actually also has the highest percentage of that GDP actually going into the armored equipment. Do you think that our unique position that much close to the conflict makes it so that...
This is just a response for the order of Mr. Trump, who asked us to just to double, triple, or even more.
You think that's the case?
No, I'm kidding, of course. No. Not because of Trump, but because of Putin and the risky geography we are living in. Yes, we are just a border of NATO, and we have Belarus, we have Russia as our neighbors in the east. And I think there's no other way today but just to spend some more money for good weapons. But we have still open discussion about the strategy of development of Polish army, because, you know, there are some figures, 300,000, 140,000. Now Polish army realistically it doesn't achieve the 200,000 soldiers. Yes, this is the limitation. And for me, the basic question is just the concept. I mean, know-how and the vision of how Polish army should develop next years. And even we were talking with Łukasz about it just before coming to studio, that we are still at the very beginning of a serious discussion about the future of Polish army. Weapons, of course, maybe not from such different directions like Korea, States and Germany. Right. I'd love to have much more unique and constant weapons. Because it's a problem. You have, for example, tanks from different countries. Yeah. But definitely we must modernize. And what I can say about Polish army today, it's in progress. That's in progress, in construction. Weapons, one thing. Second, I mean the general concept, how to protect and how to organize our army.
All right, it can't just be the tools, but people using the tools is also very important, the mindset going into it. Well, the foreign minister has made a very strong point when it comes to defense, saying that strength, security is diplomacy. And also when dealing with Russia, a lot of times deterrence through strength is of the utmost important. What are you guys' take on that? Do you also echo that sentiment?
Well, I'm looking at the headline in front of me. Poland ranks third in NATO for military strength, aims to be top in Europe. And to be honest, I'm bothered and annoyed by those flashy statistics, because statistics really do not tell us a lot about the condition of any armed forces. Okay. We might have, for example, a lot of Korean tanks, but there is a question of how many soldiers we have who can run them really in a battle. How
ammunition.
Many ammunition is another. Munitions is another thing. We have to train the soldiers. How many train events we have had so far? what is the logistics of that, of all that. So there are many, many things which are not really visible in those flashy statistics and which are very, very important for the condition of the army. So when I read that Poland ranks third, I would say this should be definitely supplemented, this sentence should definitely be supplemented by all that data, which I have just told you about, and which are not very flashy and spectacular, but are really very, very important, as much important as the number of howitzers or tanks.
All right, do you think that maybe perhaps in chasing these number and statistics, we might have to also, well, take care of something that might have been overlooked?
I would say the statistics show some trend and strategy, and it's good. Actually, I support it, and majority of political parties, there is bipartisan agreement that that spending and security is our top priority. We are, and it's because of the neighbor we have, that's inevitable. And we are the flank of NATO, we are the border of European Union. Poland has to be really armed and secure in a sense of deterrence, because this is the NATO strategy for the last decades. To deter Russia from aggression to the neighboring NATO countries, but we really should work on something else, because only spending in equipment, as Mr. Warzecha said, is not enough. So there is definitely a lot to be done, in the sense of also bipartisan agreement, in the sense that our top generals, our top militaries, cadre, should be not political, and the politics should not really differentiate who is the professional. And unfortunately, we've seen it during last 8 years. Before election, 2 top generals from our armed forces had to resign because there were disagreements between Ministry of Defense, Mr. Błaszczak, and the generals. So it was the clear signal that something is not right. And right now, the new government, there is also some signals that there is some tension between the army and new political leadership. So what I'm worried, and I think this is something we should work on it, and this is the problem we have, we should really try to be more, bipartisan, and security should be also the common goal on the political scene.
In a peaceful society, army is not necessary as a main factor of protection. But in the war that we have just across our border, it's becoming more and more important. And this 170 billion European Polish zlotys, just for investment, for weapons, it's absolutely necessary for us to live in a more secure future.
All right, thank you guys so much. And perhaps you are correct. There should be more kind of bipartisan support when it comes to security. And maybe they can be more like Press Corner and come together with diverse voices. And with that, we conclude this edition of our Press Corner. This is TVP World. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee. For more news and updates, please stay tuned. Thanks so much.